Hi, peace be upon you, folks. Today, I'd like to talk about some of the issues, mainly social issues of our society, namely uh, homosexuality and gay marriage and transgender, transsexual. I'd like to also talk about alcohol. Now, according to hadiths, which are the sayings of the recorded sayings of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him. One of the signs of the last day is that there will be widespread homosexuality. Now, this is not a positive sign. He didn't say this as a positive thing. You know, one of the signs of the last day is like the coming of the prophet himself, the last prophet and messenger, which would be the light of the world, uh, the bringer of the last revelation, which would last until the end. That's a good sign. Also, the coming of the Messiah, Jesus, the Son of Mary, peace and blessings of God be upon him. That's also a good sign of the last day. Um, but homosexuality and widespread homosexuality, he didn't say that as in, oh, that would be a good sign. So, obviously, if you want the short answer in Islam, homosexuality is not permitted, fundamentally. Um, Now, that's the short answer. But the issue is bigger than that, and the issue is more complex than that. And I think the mistake sometimes is people tend to look at issues without, for example, looking at historical background or looking at the big picture. Um, and I believe there's a secular agenda going on in which they're using the media, especially in the West, to try to create some sort of a two group kind of thing. So there is a group which they would call the moderate Muslim, and there is a group which they would call the radical Muslim. Now, there are conspiracies, and there are people who say, for example, the United States and Israel and those people created terrorist groups that they've termed terrorists. Uh, so that's another issue, and we don't know what their agenda is. Maybe some kind of new world order agenda. But the idea now is once groups they call radical engage in certain things, now every Muslim that wants to be called a moderate, because you fear of being called a radical, you have to abide by opposite of those things. So they want to make a clear distinction as if to say the moderate Muslim, which they have defined as a moderate Muslim, has nothing in common with the so-called radical Muslim. So, for example, if you look at gay homosexuality, and they tell you that radical Muslims and terrorist groups have homophobia, and they kill gays as a part of the judgment in the Sharia in the law. So moderate Muslims have to denounce this, and I think they try to use it as a means to get Muslims to try to reform Islam, try to change certain things in Islam as the Christians have done over the ages. And I hope Christians don't get angry, because nowadays if you try to say something, people are so attached to things. And it's true, if you've been attached to something for years, you've invested in that, sometimes you feel attacked. And when something is said about that thing, you tend not to want to open your mind, and because you feel attacked, you go on the defensive really quick. So I'm not saying this to insult Christianity or to bring it down, but the truth is that even the idea of in Catholicism, for example, where the prayer of Holy Mary, Mother of God, that was a later invention. You can look at the history of how that started. And even the worship of saints and all that, and the creation of the images, even in the Vatican, that was a later invention, and it was even later popes that did that. So, there are a lot of things that Christianity has reformed and have tolerated because it's important to get people to rather just acknowledge the faith than to actually abide by the faith. But that has been harder in Islam. But slowly and surely, there have been some groups that have been deviating from the core Islam, and they've been accepting this. They've been trying to appear moderate and not be termed radical, and try to appear tolerant, you know. And I believe tolerance, when they use tolerance in these societies, most times they mean heedlessness. You know, Islam itself is tolerant. It's a tolerant religion. But there's a difference between being tolerant, you know, and transgressing the bounds that God has created. Now, before I go into the topic, before I dwell on the topic of homosexuality or transgender issues and all that, you know, I'd like to make clear some things. You know, Muslims, or some Muslims and some groups, try to advocate the Sharia and say, and try to advocate establishing the caliphate, which I've made other talks about this. You know, these are Islamic ideas, these are Islamic beliefs, they're part of Islam. A Muslim should follow the what God has revealed. Otherwise, how can you claim to be a Muslim if you do not acknowledge God as your judge and your disposer of affairs? You know, if you saying you believe in God, but you do not judge by what He has revealed, when He created you and He created the lands and He created everything, then what is it you're saying? You know, when God, you've acknowledged that God is the sovereign, above, He is above everything. So, in Islam, you have to therefore abide by certain things, and you have to judge by what God has revealed. But the problem today is, even in the Muslim societies, you know, all it is people do the regular stuff. They do the 5 prayers, or some don't, and they do the Friday sermon. They go for the Friday sermon. But most people don't learn Islam and make it a more important part of their lives. We spend more time learning things that are secular, things that are worldly, learning things that will grant us a career in this life, and we don't spend nearly 1/10, even 1/10 that amount of time learning about God and dedicating our lives towards that perfection of Islam. You know, so many people don't even know why Islam is so beautiful and why they must reform their lives to express Islam in its perfection. One common example is, you know, you see, for example, a person who's dressed conservatively, dressed modestly as a Muslim, let's say a woman who has done the hijab, and you know the way she talks is just bad. You know, it's just ugly, and you wonder, like, the Prophet is said to have said in a hadith that he was sent to perfect behavior, to beautify behavior. So if you can don the hijab, you know, but you do not have the sense to talk in a beautiful manner, you talk in an obscene, in a vulgar manner, without any shyness, which is a branch of faith, then there is a really lacking in knowledge there. So there has to be some sort of an awakening in the Muslim community, in the Muslim nation, and we have to strive towards seeking more knowledge in Islam and transforming our societies in a way that's Islamic, in a way that's beneficial. So sometimes you talk about Sharia and you advocate the Sharia of Islam and the caliphate, and people think you want to be strict. You know, some people fear the Sharia because of how the media has put it, even some Muslims. But what people don't understand is God knows we're weak. God created us weak, and sometimes He wants us to acknowledge this. You know, God didn't create us because we wouldn't sin. We would sin, but we shouldn't try to make society accept sin as normal. We shouldn't try to engage in sin without any remorse. If you fall into sin, you should seek forgiveness and seek repentance and try to change your life and try to get God to strengthen you, which is a lot harder if the society doesn't abide by Islamic laws, if there's heedlessness all around you. Depending on how strong your faith is, you know, that's how much you'll be able to put up when you're immersed in some sort of heedlessness. When sin is always calling you, temptation is always calling you. For example, if your faith is light, maybe light as an atom, every time there's temptation, you fall for it, you know. And especially if you've been addicted to some of these things before you got the knowledge that these things are actually detrimental to my spiritual life. And I said before, the lack of knowledge, because some of us, maybe we grew up in Islamic homes, but we never really learned Islam like that. So because society had already gone towards a certain heedlessness, where, for example, there's a lot of alcohol in society, there's a lot of nudity on TV, on the internet. So maybe you grew up and you didn't quite think about this to contemplate whether this is wrong or not, and then you fell into some of these things and got addicted to it. Then obviously it's gonna be harder, when temptation comes. Your faith can be strong, but it can be weak towards certain things until God removes that thing from your heart. So that is what repentance is about, and depending upon God. You know, it's not that when some people say, "Oh, I don't want to pray yet because I want to be perfect." I was looking at a video somebody sent on WhatsApp, and he was saying, just pray. Even if you do this and that, just pray. Because prayer is what prohibits immorality. You don't get perfect, then you start praying. Start praying and let God help you achieve perfection. Let God help you get rid of some of those negative things. You're not a hypocrite because you fall for sin. There's a definition of hypocrisy in Islam, and it's not someone who's weak. For example, there was a companion of the Prophet who used to drink even after alcohol was banned. But he would regret it and he would come back and confess to the Prophet. And I think the other companions, one of the other companions or so, insulted him, for how he could fall into such behavior even after it's prohibited. And it is God who gives you strength. It is God who delivers you from temptation and evil. So according to the hadith, what the Prophet said was, do not insult him. As a matter of fact, he loves God and he loves God's messenger deep in his heart. So here you get the sense that, yeah, just because somebody is good and they love God, they love the Prophet, it doesn't mean they're never going to fall for weaknesses and they're never going to fall for sin. That guy had alcohol before and he probably was addicted to alcohol. It's going to take him time to actually get rid of that behavior. He might be strong at sometimes and weak at other times. And with time, God will remove it completely from his heart. Even the Quran talks about the Prophet Yusuf, alayhi salam, who is Joseph in English. And when he was tempted by the lady whose house he was staying, the lady had a husband. And he refused, and in fact he prayed to God and he asked God to remove him from the situation, and he said, in fact, prison is more to his liking than that which the lady invited him, because the lady threatened that if he didn't do that, he would be imprisoned. Like, she would concoct some untruth about him and send him to prison. And he said, actually, prison is more to his liking than what the lady is inviting him to, which was illegal, unlawful sexual activity. And one of the other things he said was that God should do this for him because maybe he might incline to it with time if God didn't deliver him from it. And this was a prophet, and the prophets are the strongest in faith. They're the most God-fearing of the people because they're the most knowledgeable. They have the certainty of God. They have the certainty of faith. So they fear the punishment of God because God has made them leaders. And as a prophet and that kind of a leader, people look to you for example. It was the same thing with the wives of the prophet. So if you fall into some kind of error, the people tend to, go astray because of that, because of one way or another. So here we see that even he was afraid that if God didn't deliver him from that, with time he might incline to such behavior. So when we talk about Islam and the caliphate, it's not because we're trying to be intolerant to people or we're trying to get a situation of a society where everybody's just being punished. You have some police standing over you, always spying on you. This I've said before. There's no spying in Islam. And the Quran tells us to avoid much negative assumption. So don't spy on people, don't assume, and don't backbite people. And the hadiths define backbiting. It is when you say something about another person which that person doesn't like. Now, if what you said was untrue, then you've slandered the person. So when you say something, even though it's true, but you say something about somebody which they don't like behind their back, then you've backbeaten them, and that's a big sin, you know, because some of these sins, when you do them, you can ask God for forgiveness, and He's the most forgiving. But if you've hurt, backbeating somebody or slandered them, then they have to forgive you. So you see, there's a difference, you know. So a lot of people spread gossip and they think it's a light thing. It's not a light thing, it's a big thing. Even if what you're saying about somebody is true. For example, there's a hadith that talked about a woman who visited the Prophet's household, or Aisha's household, and the Prophet was there. And after she left, according to the hadith, Aisha said, the mother of the believers, Aisha said, she is short. And the Prophet said she should not say that about her. And she said, oh, but I just said she's short, because she's just thinking, I mean, I didn't say anything bad, I'm just saying she's short. But that's something that lady may be aware of, that she's short. But it's also maybe something that she feels sensitive about, you know, subconscious about, self-conscious about. So maybe she doesn't like people telling her she's short. She knows she's short, but maybe she doesn't like to say it. So the Prophet said you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't say something about somebody which they wouldn't like to hear. So that's a thing about the Islamic society that I advocate for, and the Sharia. It's not about always looking for people to punish. The Sharia is not just about punishment. The Sharia is also about helping the poor, and the traveler, and the needy, and using the resources to benefit the people. Even when the Prophet was around, the resources were divided amongst the people. They helped the poor, they helped the orphan, they helped the needy. The Sharia is supposed to prevent the rich from just accumulating the resources. Also in Islam, you shouldn't publicize your sin. So if you've done a sin, some people come to confess because they feel too much remorse. And even some of the punishments the Prophet carried, according to Hadith, it was because the people themselves came and confessed. And when they confessed the first time, the Prophet would ignore them, because, don't come and talk about your sin. But because of the remorse they felt, they would say it 4 times, in which case they bear witness 4 times against themselves. So you shouldn't publicize your sin in Islam. If you've already done something wrong, ask for forgiveness and strive so that God removes that thing from your heart and makes it easy for you to stay away from that thing. So when we advocate the Sharia of Islam and the caliphate, it's so that Muslims can have a society that abides by the laws, so that it's easier for them to follow the law of God. God is going to test you anyway as individuals. He has many ways to test you. So he's going to test you with good and bad. He's going to test you with hardship. He's going to test you with fortune. He's going to test you with temptation. But we shouldn't make society so sin is widespread and immorality is accepted that we ourselves have created that kind of trial for ourselves. So that's what we advocate for in the caliphate and Islamic Sharia. And people have no need to fear this. How many people get in trouble with the law right now? How many people steal from others? Not a lot of people are in trouble with the law. So what is it that people are afraid of? I think the other thing is people are afraid that they wouldn't have as much entertainment. They wouldn't have as much fun, because it would be a strict society. Well, here's the thing. Now there are so many distractions in today's society, but yet still there's a lot missing in people's lives. There's a lot that's lacking. You're never satisfied. You always think there's more. And a lot of people are addicted to drugs. A lot of people are mentally unstable, because something is lacking. We've taken God out of our lives, and God, He's the refuge. All right? When they talk about heaven, paradise, and being the place of refuge and peace, that's peace from God. Once you've taken God out, who gives you that peace? Who gives you that comfort? So if you've not taken God as your disposer of affairs, then there's going to be trials upon trials upon trials. God said in another part in the Quran that He would move the people who don't believe, for example, who don't follow his laws continuously towards destruction from where they do not know. I've looked at that verse and I've thought, man, it makes sense. Because the more you do not follow what God has revealed, the more you keep accepting sin with time, one sin to another, one sin to another. And people talk about gay marriage, and some people who like the term extreme will tell you, oh, it might lead to people marrying animals and all that. And they're like, oh, that's too far fetched. And maybe it is. But let's consider this, for example. Yeah? If a time comes when we've gained enough knowledge in science and technology that we can actually understand the language of animals, if that time comes, and we can say, well, an animal can give consent, then what is it that would prevent a person from marrying an animal? I mean, that's just truthful. All right. The only thing that's preventing human beings from marrying animals right now is because we've not understood animals in a way that we understand each other, and we don't even understand each other that much. And we can't say for sure an animal has given consent. It would just take a couple of people to go to the court and say, actually, this animal gave consent. They create a few movies about their emotional troubles, their emotional journey, trying to get the law to actually accept the love between them and the animal, and then people start accepting it. So, once society has devoid itself from God and the law, God will continuously lead that society towards destruction, basically. It's like they talk about Pharaoh, and they say even on the day of judgment, he would lead his people to hell, because he had led them away from the law of Moses. When Moses had come and he had preached, the people would want to believe, and then and then they would say, oh, pray to God to take away this and we might believe. Then when he prayed and God took away some of their hardships, they went back. Just like you see in today's society, God gives you hardship, he gives you trials, and he gives you benefits as well. But whenever you get a trial, sometimes you call upon God, but after that you're like, I've been tried before, people go through trials before, but it ends, so at that moment when it ends, you forget. And that is the time after God has given you trials, and then you believe, but then when he takes it away, you disbelieve. He gives you another one, you believe, you take it away, disbelieve. When he's certain that you're not going to believe, well, he is certain, but when it's evident, and there's not going to be any case for you in the hereafter, basically, then he leaves you in good fortune, and you rejoice. And from there, immediately he cuts you off and he destroys that land, or he takes away the lives of the people, and then there's no turning back. There's no coming back to work righteousness or work with faith. So any sin and immorality in the society, basically, it's leading in the hereafter towards hell. Just like Pharaoh called to his people and said, why would you follow Moses? If God sent him, why God didn't send him with gold and gold bracelets and the like? Because that was his mentality. He was an intelligent guy. But, there are a lot of intelligent people who know a lot of sciences, and, but they just can't grasp the knowledge of God, because, that's another topic which I will talk about, which is the path to faith. It is God who gives you faith, and sometimes God covers some sort of knowledge for you because your heart is not pure in that way, that he wants Islam for you, that he wants that kind of a thing for you. So we have to transform our lives. We don't transform Islam to fit with people. We don't transform Islam to fit with the West, or the idea of what the West thinks society should look like. We transform our lives to fit Islam. And, people say, well, do you believe people are born gay or not? And, there was somebody who said, well, you're born gay and it's part of your genes. And later it was shown that actually it's not. But even if it was, all right, here's my take on it. A psychopath, they say, for example, a psychopath is genetic. That's what they say. And they say it's so you're born like that. But depending on how you're raised, depending on how you grew up, maybe if you're abused, you might become a serial killer, or you may not. You might become a terrible person in society, or you may not. All right. So we all have tendencies that God has created us with. We're not all the same. We all have certain tendencies towards certain sins. And some of us, that tendency is higher in us than in others. All right. Whether it's because of your sex, whether it's, your gender, or because, of some other thing. All right. So somebody might be easily addicted to alcohol, for example. All right. And somebody might find it easily tempted by riches, for example, or greed, you know. And that kind of a person, it's necessary for them, for example, not to be in power. So there are certain things that our souls, that we have been created, that we have tendencies towards. Some of us more than others. We have higher tendency towards that thing than others. So yes, I think some people are born with the tendency towards homosexuality. All right. But the way society is shaped would determine whether, it's easier for them to stay on the right path which God has created, or harder for them to stay on that path. Some of the Muslim societies, they ban homosexuality, but then they don't really restrict alcohol and forbid it, and they don't really restrict or forbid night clubbing and the nudity that gets on TV, all right, or even around the society, So the more there's a lot of nudity in society, for example, people grow up viewing these things, the more they become numb to these things, especially because women are more naked in society, actually, than men. Women cover a lot less in Western society than men, which doesn't make sense religiously. All right, but people become numb to this, so they either crave a more hyper, a more perverse sexual uh, behavior, whether they're straight or not. And some of them just now tend not to be interested in the woman, actually. So depending on the society, if the society follows God's laws, then God will protect those people. There will still be a few people who might fall for certain sins. And when, like I said, as I said before, when you fall for a sin, then ask for forgiveness and try your best not to fall for it again. All right? If you fall for it again, then maybe the next time you wouldn't fall for it easily, until maybe with time God removes it from your heart. Or you die in that condition, so maybe God still forgives you because He knows you tried. All right? But it's not to accept the thing as normal in society. All right? So if you're gonna say this is a Sharia of Islam, you have to follow the whole Sharia. You have to ban alcohol. There has to be you have to restrict too much intermingling between men and women. You know, like, well, just too much of it. You have to restrict it. It's not necessary. And reduce nudity. No night clubbing and all those other things. If couples who are married want to go out, and they are recreation. God says, the prophet says in Al Hadith, provide rest and recreation for your hearts. There are ways of recreation. There are things. It doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be dancing and grinding on each other and listening to loud music and vulgar music. And maybe when you do that, God will help that society and make it easier for the people to abide by the laws. So homosexuality, I wouldn't consider the Sharia or Muslims homophobic. Phobia is, like they say, is fear of something. Like you talk about, like a hydrophobic, fear of water. Like, I wouldn't say we're afraid of homosexuals or we hate them. You take an adulterer, for example. Yes, the act, we hate the act and would like that person to repent and transform his life. All right, but to go around and say we've accepted this as a norm and a good thing, the society should not do that. So, the Islamic society should not accept homosexuality or gay marriage, because as the Quran says, it talks about the people of Lot. I think he was a cousin of Abraham. All right, when God punished them because of their homosexuality. I mean, they had other sins too. They would rape people, they would rape men, and these were men who desired men instead of women. And God and the prophet said to them, he said, like, uh, the Quran talks about them, the men, desiring men instead of women, which is not the natural way that God has created us for. All right. So I read somewhere, well, I had come across it one time, where it talked about sex being somewhat sacred. You entering, for example, the realm of God, all right, the realm of creation, and God has created it lawful between your man and your wife. And in Islam, having sex with your wife is actually a blessing. In fact, in Islam, many things are a blessing depending on your intention. So when you seek chastity, you know, and you seek comfort and love between you and your wife, sex is a blessing. It's a good act. So God has created that act for you and your wife and made it lawful, but they have made it unlawful for anybody else. But even with you and your wife, anal sex is not allowed. You know, there are rules towards it. It's not just any kind of perversive sexual activity just because it's your wife, then it's allowed. Even some scholars have said the woman should not like insert foreign objects into herself. Like the finger is not a foreign object. So like any external object which stays on the outside, yes, but you cannot insert a foreign object basically. So there are rules, all right? But God has forbidden certain things, and we don't change that. We try to shape the society so that it's easier for the people who have certain inclinations to not follow those inclinations if they're against the law of God. So we shape the society so that homosexuality is not allowed. It's easier for people who are more inclined to be homosexual to resist that, to actually, not fall into that. You can be platonic friends with a man, that's okay. And we've reached a point in society where, like, there's no Islamic society really. There's no caliphate. The countries have been divided into like, and you have citizenship for each one. So when you start establishing this caliphate that I envision, all right, when you start to reform, then you have to make steps so that, because there are already people who they've been living in these un-Islamic societies, and they've indulged in some of these transgressions. So it's gonna be like an addiction, that they feel it's gonna be hard for them. So when you reform these societies, it's necessary to have people like psychologists and therapists to help these people, and maybe give them some kind of like leeway for like a couple of years where, nobody's gonna, well, they wouldn't be punished to the maximum if they're caught in such transgressions, because they're actually people who trying to reform. They knew that before they were living in un-Islamic societies, they had indulged in these things and they had become addicted. God says in the Quran that He would not punish the people while they seek forgiveness. So we would hope that in that society, while the people seek forgiveness, God, we should be a little bit merciful to them. But we can't allow things that God has forbidden. And we can't change the creation of God. You see, even the way they treat the animals for food in some of the Western countries, it's especially United States, it's inhumane, So, but you can't change the creation of God. So you can't transsexuality is not allowed. A man is not allowed to dress like a woman dress like a man. The Islamic society, you have to avoid that, because even all those behaviors, all that partying, the dressing up with lavishness and craziness, and the dressing up, imitating men and women and all that leads to destruction. All that is not in the path of God, so it leads towards more perverse things. So you're not allowed to change what the creation of God. A man changes parts to become a woman change her parts to become a man, and you're not allowed to dress like another sex. But here's another thing. So like I was reading this also, I saw it, I think it was Malaysia or Indonesia, and some of the scholars decided that if they can check your DNA and let's say you're born with male parts, and you consider yourself, you see yourself as a female, and they check your DNA and it says that you actually have XX chromosomes instead of XY, which the male does, then maybe they can accommodate some things for you. Not maybe change your whole creation, but accept that, you know what, maybe that person is actually physically a woman. The same goes for a man, a male who feels like a female. If they check your DNA, so there will be some things, that you can accommodate for. But to say this society allows transgender or homosexuality and all that, the Islamic society doesn't. Islam is clear about forbidding those kinds of behavior. So that's it for now. I don't think I covered the topic uh, comprehensively. Uh, you know, I don't. I think there's still much that could be said about the topic, but for now, that will be it. Hope you look forward to my next talk. So, cheers. Hope wish you the best in your search for truth. Have a good day. Yeah. Cheers.